I remember the sting of the carpet against my cheek, the hotel room light still glowing warm and golden above me while I hid in the darkness beneath the bed. My wedding dress was bunched around my legs, my heart beat loud enough to drown out my own thoughts, and every breath felt like it might give me away. If you've ever trusted the wrong person, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Because moments like this have a way of teaching us who we really are. Lying there. I could hear footsteps that didn't belong to the man I'd just promised my life to, and something inside me shifted, sharp and cold. That was the moment everything started to unravel. I never imagined the first night of my marriage would be the moment everything inside me broke open. Just hours after saying my vows, still wearing my wedding dress, I found myself pressed flat against the carpet of a hotel room, hiding under the bed like a child who wandered into the wrong story. I remember thinking it would be a harmless joke, slipping under there to surprise my new husband, Evan. But the second I heard footsteps that didn't belong to him, the air shifted. Something cold settled in my stomach before I even understood why. The carpet smelled faintly of old cologne and dust. My veil kept brushing against my cheek, making it harder to breathe. Every tiny movement felt loud, and my heartbeat pulsed so hard I worried the floor might lift underneath me. When I realized the voice in the room belonged to his mother, Joanne, something inside me tightened. Her tone carried this edge I had felt before but never fully named, and as she spoke, everything I thought I knew about my marriage began to unravel. I didn't hear a conversation. I heard a plan built long before that night, a plan built around me. Lying there, listening to her speak about my home, my savings, my father's gifts, my supposed usefulness. I felt my chest tighten in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. The truth spread through me slowly. Almost painfully, I had not been chosen. I had been targeted. And the man I had just promised my life to was part of it. By the time their footsteps faded down the hallway, I knew nothing about my life would ever look the same again. And deep down, I also knew this wasn't the first warning I had missed. I think what hurts the most about that night is how clearly it forced me to look back at every step that led me there. The shock under that hotel bed didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew from moments I brushed aside, moments that felt small enough to ignore. When I think about how I met Evan, I can still picture the warm lights of the non-profit gala in Asheville. I had come straight from a long week at work, feeling worn down and unsure of myself, and he appeared with this polished confidence that seemed to smooth the edges of everything around me. I remember feeling relieved to be seen, as if someone finally understood the weight I had been carrying. That vulnerability made his charm feel safe. And once I let that happen, I let my guard fall faster than I realized. Joanne entered the picture not long after. The first time she looked at me, she studied me quietly, almost like she was gathering information instead of getting to know me. I sensed something off, but I convinced myself it was nerves or generational difference. I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt. The red flags with Evan came softly, wrapped in what sounded like kindness. He offered to help with my budgeting because he was better with numbers. He said he preferred managing our future plans because it was easier on both of us. When I talked about my goals, he redirected the conversation back to his. I felt myself shrinking 1 inch at a time, but I didn't have the language for it then. I rationalized everything. I told myself relationships were about compromise. I told myself he cared. I told myself discomfort was normal when building a life with someone. Looking back now, it feels like watching a younger version of me walk toward a storm she couldn't see. And as I lay under that bed on my wedding night, hearing everything unfold above me, all those moments returned with clarity. For the first time, I stopped excusing signs and understood them. I remember lying there on that rough hotel carpet, feeling every fiber scratch against my skin as if the room itself was trying to warn me. My veil kept sliding across my cheek, making each breath feel tighter, and my heartbeat thudded so loudly in my ears that for a second I thought I might give myself away. But then the voices filled the room, and everything inside me went still. It didn't take long to understand what I was hearing. It didn't take long for every red flag I had ignored to come crashing back in perfect, painful clarity. Joanne spoke with a certainty that made my stomach twist, and as her words settled over me, I felt something inside me tear. She talked about my life as if it were a checklist, a set of assets waiting to be claimed. And when Evan entered, his voice carried this tired, unguarded confidence, like someone who believed the trap had already been sealed. Hearing him talk about me with that cold assurance, as if my trust were nothing more than a tool, hit harder than anything else. In that moment, the shock shifted into heartbreak so sharp it felt physical. But underneath the heartbreak, something else began to take shape, something steadier, clearer. I realized I wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding. I wasn't dealing with a difficult in-law or a flawed husband. I was lying under the bed on my wedding night listening to the man I married plan how to take what was mine. I knew I couldn't cry. I knew I couldn't move. And I knew confronting them right then would only make me look desperate and unprepared. So I stayed still, letting my tears burn without falling, letting clarity rise through the devastation. By the time their footsteps faded down the hallway, I knew exactly what I had to do next. I needed help, real help, from the people who had always protected me. When their voices disappeared down the hallway, I finally crawled out from under the bed. My legs shook so hard I had to sit on the floor just to breathe. The room felt colder than before, like the air itself had shifted around me. I reached for my phone without thinking, almost on instinct, and called my father. The moment he answered, I didn't even need to explain everything. He could hear it in the way I inhaled. I told him what I'd heard, every fractured piece of it, and he listened with this steady patience that made my chest loosen. He reminded me, in his quiet way, that I wasn't alone, that what they planned didn't define me, and that I still had control over what happened next. After I hung up, I called Dana. She didn't react with shock or outrage. She reacted with clarity. She told me to breathe, to stop the spiral, and to shift my focus toward protection. She broke everything down into something I could hold. Don't react. Don't confront. Gather proof. Her voice carried none of the panic I felt, only direction. She told me we could win this, but only if I stayed calm and deliberate. Somewhere in the middle of those two calls, my heartbeat started to settle. The devastation was still there, but it no longer controlled me. A different kind of energy started forming, something sharper, more intentional. I knew I couldn't walk back into that room as the woman they expected. I had to be someone they underestimated even more. By the time I stood up and smoothed the wrinkles out of my dress, I knew exactly what the next days would look like. I would go home with Evan. I would play the part he believed in, and silently, carefully, I would start gathering everything I needed. Walking back into our townhouse the morning after the wedding felt like stepping onto a stage I never auditioned for. Evan greeted me with the same easy smile he always used, the kind that once made me feel chosen. Now it felt like a mask, and I had to pretend I didn't know what was behind it. Every movement I made that day felt measured. I had to train my breathing, my expression, even the pace of my steps. I kept hearing Dana's voice in my mind, reminding me not to react, not to confront, not yet. Living beside him became an exercise in holding myself steady. He moved through our home with this relaxed confidence, completely unaware that the script had changed. He talked about future plans as if nothing were wrong, slipping in comments about finances or decisions he wanted to take off my shoulders. Hearing him speak that way while knowing what he was planning made my skin tighten, but I learned to nod, to smile, to let him think I still trusted him. What he didn't know was that every casual remark became evidence. He spoke too freely when he felt in control. I started documenting everything, messages he forwarded me, statements he tried to help reorganize, small boasts he made on speakerphone when he thought I wasn't listening. I gathered each piece quietly, building a timeline, building a case. My hands shook the first time I recorded one of his conversations, but over time, the shaking faded. The fear didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became fuel. My father worked silently behind the scenes too, securing accounts and shifting assets into safer places. Knowing he was out there, protecting the parts of my life Evan couldn't see, gave me a sense of stability I hadn't felt in days. As the file grew thicker, something inside me grew stronger. I stopped feeling like prey and started feeling like someone preparing for a storm she finally understood. I watched Evan obliviously talk himself into deeper trouble, and I realized I no longer felt powerless. By the end of that week, I knew I had enough proof, enough clarity, enough strength. And with that certainty came the beginning of a plan that would unfold over one dinner. I remember the quiet that settled over me the day I decided it was time. After a week of gathering evidence and moving through my home like a shadow, I invited Evan and Joanne to dinner. I kept my voice light, my movement steady, as if I still believed the version of our life they wanted me to see. In truth, every detail of that evening was deliberate. I cooked a simple meal, nothing fancy, nothing they could twist into meaning. I wanted the atmosphere flat, unremarkable, so the truth would hit without distraction. When they arrived, Joanne carried herself with the same superiority she always wore, scanning my table setting as if it were beneath her. Evan stayed close to her, acting as though he were the gracious husband guiding his new wife through domestic life. Watching them from across the room felt strange, like watching actors in a play I no longer belonged to. We sat, we ate, and I let them talk. They complained about small things, made little jabs wrapped in politeness, and carried themselves with the confidence of people who believed they were still in control. I kept my breathing even, waiting for the right moment. When the plates were nearly empty, I stood from the table and stepped into the hallway. My hands didn't shake this time. I returned with the small speaker I had tucked away earlier. I placed it gently on the table and pressed play. Hearing their own words fill the room, words spoken when they thought I wasn't listening, made both of them freeze. Joanne's face drained of color. Evan's jaw locked as if he could hold back the consequences by sheer force. I watched the realization wash over them, the planning, the manipulation, the confidence. They had handed me every piece themselves. Then Dana stepped out from the hallway, calm and composed, carrying the folder of documents we had prepared together. She laid it on the table with quiet finality, outlining exactly what came next. In that moment, I felt something inside me settle. Not triumph, clarity. I told them they needed to leave my home, and when the door finally closed behind them, the silence they left behind felt like the first real peace I had felt in a long time. The morning after they left, I woke to a stillness that felt almost unreal. No footsteps, no tension, no pretending. Just quiet light coming through the blinds and a sense that my body finally understood it was safe. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment, letting that calm settle into me. It felt like the first deep breath I had taken in months. The next few days moved gently. Dana and I worked through the legal steps with a steady rhythm, her guidance making the process feel manageable instead of overwhelming. My father checked in every evening, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes repairing little things around the townhouse as his quiet way of showing love. Each visit reminded me that I had people who stood with me long before any of this began. Reclaiming my home became its own kind of healing. I cleared closets, donated clothes Evan had pushed me to buy, rearranged furniture, and updated every account and password tied to my life. With each small change, the space felt more like mine. I noticed I moved through the rooms with a lighter step. No longer shrinking into myself, I started new routines too. Morning walks, a ceramics class on Saturdays, simple meals cooked for no one but me. These small acts felt like stitching myself back together, piece by piece, without forcing anything. For the first time in a long while, I felt a quiet forward motion, like life was widening instead of closing in, and I didn't know it then. But that openness was what would lead me to the next chapter, and to meeting Mark. I met Mark on a quiet afternoon at a home design studio while I was choosing paint samples for the townhouse. He worked there, but nothing about our first conversation felt transactional. He asked about the space I was creating, and I remember feeling surprised by how easy it was to talk with him. There was no pressure, no performance, just a calm curiosity that made me feel seen without being examined. Over the next few weeks, our paths crossed again. Sometimes it was by chance. Sometimes because I found myself returning to the studio for small things I didn't really need. Our conversations were simple. Books we loved, places we hoped to visit, memories that had shaped us. It was the gentleness that pulled me in. He never rushed me. He never tried to impress me. He simply showed up with quiet consistency. As months passed, that steadiness became the foundation of something real. I learned what safety felt like, what partnership could be. Eventually, we built a life together, one rooted in trust instead of fear. We married on a warm spring day, and later welcomed our 2 children, Nora and Ellis, into a home filled with laughter instead of tension. Life felt whole again. I had no idea an unexpected call about Evan would soon reopen a door I thought was closed for good. When the hospital called, I was in the kitchen packing Nora's lunch for school. The nurse explained that Evan had been in a serious accident and that I was his closest blood match. For a moment, the past rushed back so sharply it felt like the air shifted around me. I stood there, torn between the life I had built and the damage he once caused. But beneath the shock, I felt something steadier. I wasn't the woman who hid under a hotel bed anymore. I had a family, a home, and a sense of peace I fought hard to earn. When I told Mark, he simply placed his hand over mine. He didn't push. He didn't question. He just reminded me, quietly, that choosing compassion didn't mean reopening old doors. It meant honoring who I had become. So I went. I donated the blood they needed. And when I walked past his room afterward, I saw him for a brief moment. Pale. Still. Nothing like the force that once controlled my days. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, just a calm distance. Helping him wasn't about forgiveness. It was about freeing myself. And as I left the hospital, I felt a quiet closure settling in, preparing me for the reflection that would follow. There are days when I still think about the woman I used to be, the one who tried so hard to see the best in everyone, even when it cost her pieces of herself. But when I look at my life now, I see how far I've come. I learned that dignity isn't something another person can hand you. It's something you claim, quietly and consistently, even when your heart is breaking. Choosing compassion over bitterness didn't excuse what happened. It simply freed me from carrying it. I learned how powerful it is to trust my instincts, set boundaries, and believe that I am worthy of a life built on honesty and care. And every day, when I hear my kids laughing upstairs or see Mark reading at the kitchen table, I'm reminded of how different life can look when you choose clarity over fear. I'm grateful for the peace I've built, the strength I didn't know I had, and the future that feels fully mine. If you've ever walked through something that forced you to rebuild yourself, I would love to hear your story. Share it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this journey meant something to you, please like, share, and subscribe.